I've also been, putting videos of like crash course history and other stuff if you don't feel like looking at me. And then tomorrow afternoon, I will post the most condensed note sheet that I can put together. And my hope is, if it's a topic, when the topic comes up, you can just go really quickly to that area and have some information to use, immediately. So that's my game plan for that. So I'll have those ready for you on Tuesday afternoon, and that's you have all that stuff already. I'm just going to do a super condensed version for game day studying. So we certainly got that going too. So I think we're pretty good. We're 3 or 4 minutes in now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to present my screen here onto the DBQ, and then I'll start going through this. And please, anytime you have a question, just unmute yourself and ask, because that's what this is all about. So right now, hopefully everyone's seeing my DBQ screen, and the prompt is one that Henderson and I really hoped, would be the prompt. It seems like a really good prompt to do. It probably won't be, but it's old versus new imperialism. So the prompt is evaluate the differing motives of European imperialism, the 15th, 16th century, and those of the 19th century. Now, notice how they don't tell you exploration. They're going to throw 15th, 16th century in there, try to throw you off from the get-go. That is exploration. So that's Columbus and all those guys. The document should be able to help you out with that as well. You should be able to figure that out as you start to go through the documents. Now, once I read that prompt, now what I need is I need 2 differing motives. So in my mind, I'm thinking I need 2 things that are different between exploration and imperialism. Now, at the very end for synthesis, you could write one thing that is the same. That would be, like I said, if this one showed up, that would be great synthesis. If you could connect them, which I will. If you connect 2 things that are the same there, then that's your synthesis. But don't do any similarities in your thesis statement. Don't do any similarities in your documents. Don't say like, these 2 are different, but they're also kind of the same. Don't do that. Just go different. All right. And then at the end, at the synthesis, if you want to do a similarity for some extra points there, then go for it. So, given that, okay, my first thing that I'd want to do is I'd want to come up with my context. Now, given the fact that you're dealing with 2 huge periods of time there and that are very different periods of time, context on this one is kind of challenging. Because if you just like started doing like the Middle Ages, then that wouldn't really work for 19th century imperialism and vice versa. So what I would do for my context is I would say, if I wanted to do after, I would say after both of these periods, we see a cycle of warfare due to the conflicts caused by these periods. So, if I really wanted to be fancy, I'd say after imperialism, we have World War I, and after, European exploration, we have, the 7 Years' War, the War of Jenkins' Ear, the French and Indian War. You can go on and on and on with different wars that are caused by exploration. So that would be good context. Like, this is what happened after these 2 things went down. Now, if you want to do before, which I don't think is as strong, but if you wanted to do before, I would probably go with both of these time periods followed intellectual movements. So, one could say that exploration kind of follows the Renaissance, although it is kind of simultaneous. I think you could argue that point, that the new discovery of Greece and Roman technologies pushed people forward into exploration and blah, 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 blah. On the imperialism side, I would use the Enlightenment. These new Enlightenment ideas spurred on industrial revolution, which caused Europeans to go, and then blah, 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 blah. So if you wanted to do the before, I would do the intellectual movements there. And if you want to do after, I would do the wars. Either of those would work. I think the wars are a little stronger only because of the Renaissance kind of overlapping exploration, but I feel that both would work for you. So that would be your context. I'll pause for a second if anyone's got any questions on the context. Okay. Now, when you're getting into your thesis, you need you need two differing motives. Okay, so two examples on why they're different, and just make sure you write like, one example why they're different is. Two example, second example why they're different is. Make sure you're very deliberate. There's no sense for flowery language. It's not necessary. Just be very deliberate about it. Now, on this one, I basically came up with some characteristics of both. All right. In old imperialism, I'm looking at Christianity, colonization, and personal fame, greed, however you want to look at it, where it's about me. In new imperialism, some characteristics: social Darwinism, nationalism. It's more about the country than it is the person. Natural resources, and the desire to increase trade. Those would be some things that I would look at as characteristics of each. So if I was doing my thesis, like I would say one difference between old imperialism and new imperialism is old imperialism was spurred on by Christianity, whereas new imperialism was spurred on by social Darwinism. So, there would be one difference, clearly stated. One difference is old imperialism was spurred on by Christianity, new imperialism was spurred on by social Darwinism. Don't have to explain it. Don't have to explain it. You can explain that in the body. Just give me the reasons there. So the second one that I would do is I would say that old imperialism has a lot to do with the desire for personal wealth and personal glory. Cortez, Columbus, these guys aren't even, Columbus ain't even Spanish. I mean, it's about the money. Now, where we look into new imperialism, it's much more about nationalism. It's much more about the country and what does the country need and things of that nature. So, new imperialism would be a more nationalistic, not as an individualistic. So I would say, the second difference between old and new imperialism is old imperialism was primarily motivated by the desire for personal wealth and glory, whereas new imperialism was motivated by the desire for, to promote one's nation and also to, we could say, acquire natural resources. Now, I want to be careful about the natural resources, all right, because when we go into these documents, which I'll get into in just a second, there's not a document that really talks about like European countries looking to get stuff for industrialization. There's just not a document supporting that. It's true, but there's not a document supporting it. So it's going to be tough to tie that into your thesis if you just said like, old imperialism was about gold and silver, and new imperialism was about natural resources. Agreed. That's a correct statement. Tough to back that up with your documents. So I would tie in gold and silver to personal greed, and I would tie natural resources into a more nationalistic view of I'm doing this for England, not for myself. And when we go through these documents, I think that'll start to show up. Now, the last thing I want to say before I move on to the thesis and we start, putting some of these documents together is I wanted to talk a little bit about, looking at the documents before you write your thesis statement. So like once I looked at the question, the second thing that I would do is I would go through the documents and just see what they're giving me. Like, okay, so I got to get a difference between imperialism and exploration. Like, what are these documents? What are they giving me? And then, what I did on mine is I went through each document and I wrote down like what I think they're talking about. And then I used that to support my thesis. So right after you read the prompt, I'd look through the documents. I'd figure out, what ideas are in there for you to use in your thesis statement before I write it. If you write your thesis first and then you go into your documents and you're like, oh crap, I can't prove any of those things I just said. Now you're looking at a thesis rewrite or not supporting your thesis and all those kinds of things. So, I think that's a good way to start out tackling it is to look at those documents first. Now, I'm going to start going through the documents here and talk about how I would put these together, unless anyone's got any questions on the thesis statement. If you have any questions on that, feel free to unmute yourself and ask me right now. I'm happy to help. Okay. I'm not going to read all these documents to you. Okay, you can see them, but Doc 1 is from Christopher Columbus's journal. So we know this is going to be old imperialism. And in document 1, we see two things that stand out. Number 1, Christopher Columbus is talking about Christianity. Okay, and bringing faith to these poor people, and all this idea of Christianity is the key religion, and we're going to promote that here, which is one of our thesis points. The other thing is at the end, you can see how Columbus is talking about how he expects his exploits to get him, the viceroy and governorships, and call himself a don and be a high admiral of the sea. He ain't talking about Spain. He ain't saying like this is for the glory of the Spanish government. No, he's saying, hey, I just want to make sure that I get all my props here and that it goes to my eldest son too. So that would be that selfishness, the greed. So, document 1, you could use that to support that Christian side. You could support it to do the greed side, or you could use it to support both points if you want. So that's how I would use document 1. Now we go down to document 2, and we've got Cortez writing to Charles V about the Aztecs and Tenochtitlan. Now in this one, I find it difficult to use Christianity. He doesn't really talk about it. It'd be a real stretch to try to use this to defend the Christianity part. But certainly the exploitation of wealth, the personal greed, gold, silver, jewels, all that kind of stuff is being talked about. I think you can use it on that end. Looking at this document, and I didn't put this in my thesis, but another thing that you could talk about is colonization versus trade. So in the first, in old imperialism, we're looking at like, I'm going to conquer these people, set up colonies, make them part of our empire. Whereas in new imperialism, it's more about like, we want to set up like successful trade routes to our advantage. Like we're not looking to like, make these people part of the English empire. That's not really what they're looking to do there. But to keep it simple on this one, I would use it to promote personal greed. That's what I would go with. You're struggling on Christianity on this one. So maybe you use Columbus for Christianity and this one for personal greed. Now our third one is the most difficult one, and I'll kind of just scroll up and down so you can get a good look at this. All right, we've got ourselves a drawing here, which is always the most difficult document to work with. And in this drawing, one thing that stands up is those two guys trying to put the cross up. That fits in perfectly with what we're talking about. Christianity and all that kind of stuff. You could argue colonization, and you could argue personal wealth. But in the personal wealth area, like there's not a ton to go with on this painting itself. Like you could say they're offering them gifts. I think you could go with that. Christianity is certainly the strongest angle to play here. But greed and personal wealth, even to a degree, colonization, I think you could play that too. But Christianity is going to play out pretty strong there. So that's how I would use the documents from the old imperialism period. If there's any questions on old imperialism and how it would be used, Okay. Now you could use all of those separately. Okay, you could say, document one supports my thesis in that it argues, Christianity over social Darwinism. Okay, and that'd be fun. And then you could, go into the document, summarize it, talk about how that defends the point. You could do all that stuff. You can also say, like, which would make it easier, like documents 1 and 3 support my thesis in that Christianity was the motive over social Darwinism. And then, you don't have to write that out for each individual document. You can just say documents 1 and 3, and that works. And you cover that, and you've connected them both now to the thesis. The only thing that stinks about grouping is if you make a mistake. And like, let's say you say documents 1, 2, and 3, support my thesis in regards to Christianity. And then the person that reads goes, well, Cortez is not saying anything about Christianity. That could blow your grouping. That could blow your connection to the thesis. So grouping can be dangerous if you don't feel confident with the documents. But it can help you in that it makes it easier, where you don't have to connect every single document. So, that's how I would group those if you were going to mess around with grouping. Now moving down to Doc 4. This one is by Cecil Rhodes. If you can remember that cartoon where he's standing across Africa from Cape to Cairo. And, if you read that little, excerpt there, this is New Imperialism. It's basically social Darwinism. He's like, England's the most powerful race in the world. Everyone, should love England. We're the most respected. We are, biologically superior. He basically is the blueprint for social Darwinism. So, I would probably compare that to Christianity. That's how I would do it. But certainly with Cecil Rhodes there, social Darwinism works well. And then also what also works really well there is nationalism. He's not talking about himself. He's not talking about, hey, I really need to, get some money out of being the governor of South Africa here. Hopefully I get paid out. He's talking about England and the British race, and, it's very nationalistic. So I think document 4 could be used well for nationalism and for social Darwinism. And if you're sitting there like, what's social Darwinism? All right, that is the idea that, people are biologically superior to other races out of, Charles Darwin's theories there. So that would work pretty well there. And then our 5th document, our last document, is Jules Ferry. And he's basically talking about, how amazing France is. Certainly nationalism. This is the best possible document for nationalism because, again, it's all about his country and not about himself. You could also use social Darwinism here, I think. Although I don't see any like overt racism, he certainly feels that French people are better, and one could argue biologically better than everyone else. He's certainly saying that with maybe not specifically saying it. So nationalism is your stronger link there. Then I think social Darwinism would be like a kind of a secondary link to making that happen. So all of those documents are now explained, and I think I've given you a pretty clear cut on how I would use them and group them, and hopefully that kind of explains to you like how you would put the body of the paper together. I have been scrolling through the documents, and I just wanted to go through some like historical context, like some things that you might want to throw in. Going through them, like the social Darwinism, white man's burden, never talked about. Never talked about. So, if you brought those in, those would be some great facts. Even on the God, gold, and glory, the 3 G's, I think that could count as a fact. Any of the specific explorers or specific examples of imperialism you could put in, Leopold II and what happens in the Congo. You can't use Cortez, but you could use like Pizarro and some of those guys. I think that might help you out as far as exploration goes. So those are some ideas of some facts you could put in to support your thesis. Another one could be, Las Casas and the Black Hand, where he talks about the exploitation of people in old imperialism. So those are some different facts that you could work in. On game day, what I would do, is, once you see the prompt, I would just, access, the information on that area. And then, you've got the key facts that you can use there, to help you out. So you can certainly do that as well. I think the last thing I want to go through with you is point of view. And then I'll, answer any questions that you have. And then that's pretty much all I got for you today. I've gone through all the content, and, now we've done this DBQ, and I think I'll end out after that. But, going through point of view, in the first one, why is Christopher Columbus writing this to Ferdinand and Isabella? I would say, Christopher Columbus is biased because he is the person doing this exploring, and he's advocating for his own rewards. So, like, of course, Christopher Columbus would want the king to call him Don and High Admiral of the Sea and Viceroy and Governor and all of these things, because it's him and he's doing the work. So he's certainly going to promote himself. So, we can't take his exploits or what he's saying here, as completely factual, because he certainly is trying to make it sound good so that he can get all of these rewards. Now, keep in mind, I'm not saying Christopher Columbus is biased because Christopher Columbus is writing this. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, why? Because he's writing this, does it make him biased? Well, he's going to write that he wants all of these titles because it's going to make him a lot of money. I'm taking it a little bit further. Now, in the second one, we've got Cortez. And Cortez is writing to Charles V. And although it's difficult to see exactly what Cortez is looking for here, it looks as if he's looking for more military support, maybe more financial aid. It looks like he's looking for some backing from, Charles V. So, why might he be saying that, Tenochtitlan is the noblest city in the whole new world, and that we have everything to gain here? Well, he's trying to get Charles V to send him more troops and money, and Charles V ain't going to do that if, Cortez is like, yeah, we took over this slop village in the jungle, and, I really can't find any value, but, man, I could use some extra soldiers and some more money. Like, that ain't going to fly. So his bias there is that he's writing to his king, and, he's requesting more aid, and certainly he's going to make the situation as important as possible. So that's how I would do bias there. This painting is probably, one of the more difficult paintings that we're going to be looking at. I would say that I probably wouldn't go after it if I was doing point of view. This would not be a document I would pick. However, if I did have to pick it, I would say, if we look down at the caption here, let me scroll down here a little bit. All right. That doesn't help us out too much. So just looking at the painting, I would say, this painting was obviously done by a European, and the portrayal of the Native Americans is certainly biased, not only because it was drawn by a European, but also it makes these Native Americans look like they're super happy to see these Europeans, offering them gifts, and everything seems to be very cordial and cheery, which certainly isn't the situation of what happened in the New World. This might be how the Spanish want to look at it, but these Native Americans were not super pleased that these invaders were showing up. So I would basically say the reason I think it's biased is because it's drawn by a European, and it portrays the Native Americans as these people that can't wait for the Europeans to show up. So that's probably how I would play that one out. Cecil Rhodes and his confession of faith. I think this is a pretty easy one. You can even take it a little further than what they give you. You would say Cecil Rhodes is clearly a British citizen during this time of extreme nationalism. It makes sense that he would think that England is the greatest race in the world because he's English. You could even go further and go, Cecil Rhodes was the governor of South Africa during this time period. So, of course he's going to promote his race and what he's doing because it makes him and his race and his country look better. So that's how I would do document 4. And then going down to document 5, I think this is the easiest point of view. Jules Ferry is a member of the French National Assembly. He's a member of the French government. Of course, he is going to play up the French as the greatest country in the world. And, no one can rival their genius because not only is he French, he's a part of the French government. So that would be a pretty clear bias there. And Doc 5 would probably be the first one I would go with. And then I would probably go with Chris Columbus second, actually. And then, I'd probably take some shots at the others just to see if I get some points there in case I missed one. But, that's pretty much how I would go with that. And I don't think there's anything else with this DBQ that I want to go through. Does anyone have any questions on the DBQ? Okay. So, that's how I would go at a DBQ. And, when you sit down, certainly I imagine you'll have, some content around you, but then also, maybe just a piece of scrap paper just to jot down, ideas as you're rolling through, looking at the documents, looking at the thesis, what documents can I use together to support this? All those things will help you out. And then, if you had some time at the end, with synthesis, if you were to do a similarity between the two, one clear similarity would be in both situations, you have European countries clearly exploiting other areas of the world for their own personal benefits. That's one thing they're doing. They might have different motivations for doing it, but in both situations, they are ripping the rest of the world off for their own gain. Whether it be Christianity is the motivation, or nationalism is the motivation, or social Darwinism, or greed, in the end, they're ripping people off. So that would be my similarity on both. And then obviously, you want to put some facts in there, something to support that. And I think you'd have a strong synthesis there to close out. That is all I got for you today. Wednesday morning, I'm actually going into school. It's the first time I've been there since we left. So I am scheduled to go into school. If people have any questions, you can send me a question on email. At this point, I don't really know 100% what I could do for you as far as a session on Wednesday morning. I've pretty much done it all at this point. If you want to have some kind of a session Wednesday morning, just shoot me an email or text, and I can maybe put that together, or Google Classroom post or something like that. And I can maybe put that together if there's some interest, but I'm kind of, just thinking to deal with that on an individual basis as we get closer. And then, lastly, again and again, please look at those links, especially the stuff on the AP sign up and the technology stuff. If something happens on Wednesday where, your dog ate poison and you got to take him to the vet and, you missed the test, contact me. There is the makeup test. You're not completely out. It's in June, which is horrible, but you can do it. So just contact me and, I'll help you get set up with that. And lastly, you're right at the end. This could be some significant money for you in college. Make sure you do some prep. Make sure you show up and take the test. I personally feel that you're about to walk into the easiest AP test maybe ever. And if you're just ready to go, I think you're going to crush it. That's my spiel. If anyone was too shy to answer questions and wants to stick around until after everyone bails, feel free to do that. And I just want to end with, it's been mostly all the same group of people. And I really, really appreciate you, still taking this seriously when I know it's easy for you not to. Both you and I put in a lot of work here, and I do really appreciate you finishing out to the end here. So I just want to say that. So have a great rest of the day. And like I said, if there's anything I can help you out, just shoot me an email. I'll get back to you fast, boy. And then all grades are due May 22nd. I've had a couple people send me some DBQs and some review packets, and that's fine. Keep sending them to me. I'll keep punching in grades. So that's all I got for you. Feel free to head out. Thanks so much. All right, let's